Welcome to Healing Solidarity, Embodying Change, the second conference about reimagining international development. I'm Mary-Anne Clements, feminist writer, facilitator, activist and coach, and I'm the initiator of Healing Solidarity. In this conversation, I talk with Faye Ekong, Managing Director of Ravelworks Africa, about the fundamental shifts we need to see in human resourcing in order to shift practice in the humanitarian sector, about why organisations need to rethink how they pay and support their people, and why the categories of international, national and local staff need to be revolutionised. Finally, we also talk about what Faye thinks we can learn from the private sector. Enjoy. So, hi and welcome to Healing Solidarity in a conversation with Faye Ekong, who's the Managing Director of Ravelworks Africa. And they're focused on organisational development and organisational change. And I think, Faye, it'd be cool just to hear from you a little bit about who you are, what you do in the work. Yeah, tell us a bit more.
Great. Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be here. I'm really excited about that. And it's always difficult when people say, introduce yourself. What do you want to say about yourself? But I think in simple terms, I would characterize myself as a citizen of the world with a passion for change. And I say citizen of the world because I've been very fortunate. I'm half Nigerian and half British, but I've been fortunate enough to grow up in Ghana and in Germany and work and study in the UK, in Belgium, in Italy, in the US, and now for the last 12 years, I've been based out of Kenya and East Africa. So that has really afforded me the opportunity to see issues from multiple perspectives and angles. And as we set up Ravelworks Africa, like you just mentioned, focused on organizational development, it really helps us to build more lasting and stronger relationships with our clients to have this multifaceted approach or thinking around certain issues. So in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. You're a global person. So we wanted to talk a bit about resourcing and humanitarian work and kind of the challenges that we see coming up in that whole part of our work. So let's maybe dive into, what the challenges are, just to outline for people, like in humanitarian organizations with respect to people. What are the big challenges that you're seeing right now in your organizations? Yeah.
Right. So, human resources, it's always an interesting one to delve into because human resources make an organization, whether you are in humanitarian or any other sector. And some of the challenges that I have observed over the years being an HR practitioner myself actually starts with the HR function in itself. So the HR function is a relatively new function if we look at it in compared to finance or legal. And HR function in the humanitarian sector in particular is really struggling still to get its foot in the door and fully express itself. So when I look at human resources, a lot of us are talking about outside in HR. So looking really, what do your constituencies need from you, from your organization? And in humanitarian, that is, what do your communities, the people in need, what do they need from you? When it comes to people's behaviors, attitudes, how people interact with them, what kind of services they deliver. And I'm seeing that there is a gap in terms of HR practitioners being able to really bring that to the table and moving beyond the role of administration and timesheets and leave requests and policies, and really internalizing the external environment and building the cultures necessary for proper execution of high quality humanitarian programs.
So there's too much focus on the kind of like the tasks, the small, what feel like the small tasks, and not enough on the big picture.
It's a very tactical operation still. It's a very administrative and compliance focus. And when we see, more and more INGOs or humanitarian agencies struggling with funding diversity or wanting to localize, bring on board local partners within the communities, what does that mean from a human resourcing perspective? What kind of workforce do you need to make that happen? And what changes do you need to make within your organizational structure and dynamics to actually enable equal and full participation of local partners within that dynamic, and not just tick the box local partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a bit more about what would be, if people were to really embrace that and think about the localization agenda and what it means for your people and partnerships as well. Like, what do you think needs to change? What would you like to see organizations doing that maybe they're not doing yet?
Well, localization, of course, it sounds beautiful on paper. It's a great thing to say in conferences and to write white papers and reports about. But in practice, it means a fundamental shift in terms of power dynamics, power structures. And that's where the hard things start. So, I was reading an article published by Alexander Matthew actually in early 2018 saying he fears that the localization agenda is running out of steam. Right now, and my fear is the same as well. I think it sounded good at the time, just as MDGs and SDGs, everything sounds very good, but what it means is a fundamental shift. It's for organizations to realize that the structure we have at the moment is not the one that we need going forward if we are serious about localization. Localization means giving up power in the global north to really putting those power structures here. And in the global north, you might still have a role with regards to fundraising or marketing or some of these things, but the actual implementation, the true connection, the stakeholder dialogue needs to happen here. And that means scaling down. That means, people going home, losing their jobs in Washington, Geneva, London, etc. And that's very hard for people to accept. It's one thing to present it, it's another thing to say, and as I present, I now, resign from my job because that needs to move to Rwanda or to Tanzania.
Yeah, absolutely. And so given that, and given that we know it's not happening or it's not happening enough, and maybe it's running out of steam, and what can we do about it? Apart, obviously, there are those of us that need to say, like, my job doesn't need to exist anymore. And that's a hard thing, but it's a reality as well, right? It's a reality. If we're going to say that we agree with the localization agenda at a theoretical level, I think we also have to be willing to practice it at a personal level, right?
Yeah.
And what beyond giving up our jobs do you think people in agencies can do about that? Like, what would you like to see in terms of, the practical stuff happening in organizations?
Well, one of the practical things that I would like to see happening is agencies really reflecting on what is the value that we are adding honestly. Yeah. It's easy to say we are dealing with mothers or children or environment, but at the end of the day, communities in need really don't care so much where that support is coming from. They just need support. They need systems, infrastructure, access to jobs, education, etc. And that, for me, it starts with really leadership of those organizations at executive level. One, we're seeing across the board in INGOs that executive or even board level has very limited diversity. Both in terms of gender diversity, but much more in terms of representation from the actual countries that you are serving. So for me, a start in taking the localization agenda seriously is, first of all, staffing your boards with people from those contexts who can really give you a much more clear direction and realistic roadmap onto how this needs to work. Because I mean, if it is just one thing, is start by getting a more diverse board. Because once you have that in place, it will be much easier for you to shift systems and power structures and decision making to the actual countries where the operations are taking place.
Yeah, what I love about that is that it's kind of the opposite of what I think people sometimes do, which is to go try and diversify, like, the jobs, the sort of least powerful jobs to start with. Right, so kind of like go try and hire locally for, like, whatever locally means, but go try and hire people for the least well-paid jobs, for the least powerful jobs, and then, like, leave the structures higher up, right? So it's like you're saying we've got to do the opposite.
Exactly. And we are seeing some shifts, more and more INGOs are moving their global headquarters or parts of their global headquarters to, South Africa or to Kenya. So we are seeing some start. But I'm not fully convinced that those moves are really because of the belief in the global south, or if it is pressure from donors to say, listen, you gotta, your structure in New York is too expensive, so you gotta find another solution, or these kind of
yeah.
things.
And the thing I hear quite a lot people talking about that sort of relocation of headquarters is then also the thing that happens where your office of a relocated INGO starts to kind of drag resources away from like locally grown or national organizations in some of these places. So then there becomes that conflict almost replicates in a way in the, in terms of particularly human resourcing in the kind of in other contexts. So I don't know what you think about that, because I kind of think, well, why don't we just give the money to national organizations to do the work? Like, where's the,
Well, yes. I mean, on the one hand, I do believe that INGOs, the way they exist currently in the next 10 to 15 years, it cannot continue that way. If INGOs were operating like a private sector business, many of them would be out of business because everybody is more or less selling the same product. So, and in a business world, it would be like, who is doing the, highest quality, fastest delivery, more efficient, most innovative. So, if you just check how many organizations are working on women's empowerment, on nutrition, or here's thousands of them, that doesn't make any sense for populations in need. One is to consolidate all of that and just let one or two players, work with that and really specialize and streamline. But the second thing that you're saying is, why do we even still need kind of middlemen, right? To take, money is coming from the EU or from the US government. Now there's a middleman in here called INGO who absorbs all of that funding and then trickles it down to whichever country. That's a very good point to raise, and I think a very touchy point for many INGOs, because if you truly ask the question, what is your value added in terms of, in terms of true delivery, and is your service any better? Is the quality any higher because we have you in as that middleman? I don't think the answer will be yes.
No.
And sometimes there is this misguided belief that somehow if we cannot find the qualifications needed in the global south, it needs to be somebody from outside. And second of all, if we send this money directly to the communities or to community-based organizations, it will all magically go missing because corruption and all of these things are so rampant. And that's a gross overstatement. It's a of course, we might have in certain cases, cases of fraud, but we cannot characterize an entire continent, for example, based on that. And my argument is always, if you look at, I speak about sub-Saharan Africa in particular, how many thriving businesses we have who are all staffed with, chief financial officers, chief marketing officers, all from that country, and they're working fine. So, it's not like, well, oh my goodness, if we lose power, everything is going to go crazy.
Yeah, the evidence is quite the opposite, right? So there's something in the belief that needs to really shift, I think.
Yeah. But that's the INGO model, right? So it's very much, very outdated views. If you look at how international development started, it was, somebody from the West coming to save the poor in Asia and in Africa, medical doctors, etc. But as much as our context has changed, the beliefs have not.
Yeah, the beliefs still underpin the way we're organizing things, right?
Yeah.
And like, from your perspective, and I know working a lot with organizations and thinking about how they do stuff, do you see that ever changing? Or do you think, like you said, that eventually the structure will just die out and make way for maybe different kinds of fund flows? I don't know.
I don't think that it will change in INGOs, because changing organizational culture, which is so deep rooted in the whole way that development aid is set up, because it is an unequal system, right? It is one side saying, I know what is best for you, and I will give you money or resources to do what I tell you to do. And that's going to be very difficult to overhaul. So I believe that we will start seeing other forms of support coming out in the next few years, and we're already seeing that. If you look at the growth of social enterprises across Asia, across Africa, who, are running like a business, but for social good. And you see the transformation happening in those communities a lot faster than some of the INGOs who've been doing, I don't know, water wells or, food distribution for 30 years. And they are working not necessarily with traditional funders, but also with investors who are interested, to be socially conscious investors. So I think we're seeing a lot more move into that direction. And you are also seeing World Bank, IMF, EU, etc., DFID being interested in those kind of, partnerships.
Yeah. So maybe INGOs will in a way, shift or change or just become irrelevant.
They will have to. And look, there's always going to be an argument for, disaster or emergency response.
That's what I wanted to come to. Right. Yeah.
So as human beings, we have a kind of moral obligation to support, to help, communities which are in need, if it's flood, if it's war. So that will always be there. But even there, we can see, Haiti was a very good example. The local communities who could have responded faster, who knew exactly what the issues were very often sidelined by the big INGOs who came in. But there will always be an argument for humanitarian relief. How you do that, that's a different question. But the whole concept of international development aid, I'm not sure how long that will continue in its current form.
Yeah, right. When it comes to humanitarian, because I know you probably know quite a bit more than I do about that. Do you think there are ways of, there's the grand bargain, there's this whole idea of kind of how do we have this localization agenda in humanitarian work? Like, do you see ways that can be enabled, particularly when it comes to thinking about people? Because I know that the sort of traditional model in humanitarian is that you get some people and fly them into the emergency kind of thing. What alternatives do you see? How could that be restructured? I don't know.
Right. So again, we've seen a lot of discussions in the last 10, 15 years around surge capacity, building surge capacity, training, emergency responders. And again, in many cases, not all those emergency responders always come from outside. Right. Which means, you hit the ground, but you don't know very much about the culture, the context, the needs, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things in my mind would be really, if you're talking about surge capacity, is focusing on the countries and focusing on neighboring countries, right? Where you don't have big visa restrictions, people can easily travel. They do have enough understanding of the context to be able to support. So I would like to see much more emergency teams being set up from within those countries to be able to respond to crisis in their own countries, working through local INGOs, CBOs, faith-based organization, the local Red Cross, whoever is on the ground already. And let's help those and support those with additional resources rather than bringing in, again, a second layer of emergency respondents.
Yeah, so you build that capacity where in different countries around the world. That seems to make sense. It kind of raises the question for me, like, why is that not what's been happening? And I think it probably has a lot to do with, the way that organizations have thought about their role as being this kind of, we need to jump in and do stuff when something goes wrong. But as you said, there's so many examples of that not working all that well.
Right. And let's think about if we have a disaster in the United States or in the UK. Well, take United States is a good example with all of their hurricanes always. You're not flying in people from Indonesia and Philippines to support the hurricane response. It is local communities who gather together and other states who put their resources. So I don't see an argument why in the global south that cannot be the same. Why can Indonesians not support emergency response in their own country? That they know their country, they know where to go and where to find support quickly.
Absolutely. And so with these sort of when big disasters happen, there's often big fundraising campaigns, right? And it has something, I think, to do with how that works. The fact that this isn't yet happening, and I guess my question would be, like, how can we redirect resources to make that happen? Because I see what often happens is it's an emergency, there's this surge capacity. This is what we do, and it's almost like you said, that the thinking hasn't gone in before to like how do you prepare the capacity for that to happen. Yeah, I guess well, what's my question? You've already answered it. You already said we just need to build those capacities locally. I guess
and stop being also so reactive. Humanitarian
right.
and also INGOs are really, again, not all of them, but many of them are characterized by their just reactive nature. There seems to be limited organizational capacity for proper strategic foresight, thinking through what are different scenarios going to be, what will I need if and then. It's always waiting to the moment, then we do a big gala or whatever it is, fundraising, emergency aid, and we're scrambling then to get our own staff onto planes. And you think about that, again, bringing in people, it's a high cost, a cost that could be going to actually the emergency response. By the time you have put in place staff houses and drivers and per diem and all of these kind of things, that's crazy amounts of money going for somebody who's going to be on the ground for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, and still leave the local community behind, having to deal with, the true management of the consequence of the disaster.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues we wanted to talk about was there's then the issues around pay and benefits and staff care in these organisations also seem to be very significant. So the issues about who gets paid what and how different wages are calculated, and then also about the kind of care and support that's provided to staff. And I've definitely seen in the work I've been doing like kind of 2 or 3 tier systems where certain people receive benefits on very different levels to others, and pay is hugely differentiated between quote unquote local staff or national staff and then international staff. Can you say just a little bit about that and what the dynamics of that are in the humanitarian sector?
Right. We can start off by, first of all, the terminology in itself.
Right.
When you are using in your organization the terminology of local staff, national staff, the expatriates, the international, and then sometimes you have that final level, which is headquarters staff.
Okay.
So already, in your language, you are dividing your organizations into 3 different levels who are not equal. Yeah, and for me, that is always the first question: is why do you need to divide your staff? Surely you have staff. That is step number 1. Now, those staff might hold different passports, but that does not differentiate them in terms of the services which they should receive from you, and nor the benefits and the salaries. So, and that is, I know it's a very touchy one, and people can get very upset about it. But at the end of the day, my question is always, what are you paying for? Are you paying for passport, or you're paying for the job that is being done? If it's for the job, then doesn't matter where I come from, we should all be receiving exactly the same for the job. And I think for INGOs in particular, when most of them have values of, justice, transparency, integrity, equality, but yet your very system, your setup, how you treat your own staff already has this division in it. So we are seeing challenges right from the beginning. In that sense. So, and that's a very difficult one for people to come to terms with. And I've heard very often the argument saying, oh, but Faye, but these people have left their home country and they're going to wherever it is, Nigeria, or they're going to Ghana, so we somehow need to compensate them. And my answer is no, because nobody forced you to leave your home country. This was a choice. You said, I want to take this opportunity to do a job somewhere else. So why should that somehow entitle you to benefits which your peer does not get just because they happen to be from that country?
Yeah. What about this argument of like someone who comes, for example, from, I don't know, France or Norway or whatever, needs to be paid more because things cost more in the country they come from? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've heard that argument as well. But the thing is, once again, it's not the employer's obligation to compensate you for that you live in Norway or in New York. It is again your choice to leave that country
Yeah,
and move somewhere else. Now, of course, we can have a discussion around, some basic assistance. Of course, organizations should be paying for your flight because they're the ones asking you there, and perhaps help you in the first 2, 3 months to find
yeah,
accommodation. But when you throw in all of these other benefits, which really makes such a huge gap
yeah,
between, what one person is taking home. I mean, for many, let's put it like this, international staff, international business, international development, it's huge business. It is the best compensation they will ever receive in their life. When you go back to Norway or Geneva or wherever you came from, nobody's paying your rent and your school fees and a driver for you to pick and drop you from the office and
yeah.
yeah. So it's it's a high motivation. Why wouldn't you want to take on one of these jobs and have everything taken care of for you for the next 2, 3 years?
But in the context of work that's supposed to be about, helping with emergency situations that people are living in really difficult circumstances, it does seem very out of values to me to be
Right.
resourcing people in that way to do that kind of work, right?
Right. And if if you look as well, where the INGOs normally located in certain countries is always in the most expensive, in the posh areas,
Yeah,
close to the embassies, the UN, etc. Where the international staff located is always within that green zone, which is basically shielding you from the realities of what is going on in that country to a large extent. And it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't really encourage equity. It doesn't encourage justice. And like you were saying, your setup as an INGO is about serving people in need. Uh, if you are a private sector organization, I can fully respect your choice to say, I'm bringing in so and so from wherever. He is the best marketing executive we have. Give him whatever he needs because he's gonna turn this thing around. That's a very, very different kind of setup, because the underlying premises is we need to maximize profit. It's not we're trying to support societies and communities.
yeah. And also then the underlying belief that somehow you couldn't hire somebody in the country where you want to hire somebody that could do the job, I think is also something we really need to challenge, as you already mentioned. Like,
Yeah.
why are you bringing someone in? And like you said, a business can do it if they want to. They're not responsible in the same way to the communities that they serve. But if humanitarian organizations are really kind of responsible and accountable in that sense to the communities they serve, it doesn't make any sense to be bringing people on huge packages from halfway around the world, really.
No. And first of all, we're also seeing private sector scaling that down more and more and more. So we're seeing, and private sector is very, very particular about it, to say, look, you're coming in for 2, 3 years. This is my expectation at the end. And you train somebody to take over and you go back to where you came from. And in private sector, that seems to be running quite successfully, actually. In the non-for-profit sector, the rhetoric is there about, the understudy and training somebody. But I have seen cases where somebody has been an understudy for 5 or 7 years. Now, surely you cannot tell me that it takes 5 or 7 years to learn how to be a finance manager or a country director. That is simply ridiculous. What that means is that either you have failed as an organization to put in your succession planning properly, or you never had the intention in the first place to do it.
Yeah,
It was just, it sounded good at the time.
yeah,
And I challenge, I've had this discussion as well, severally, people saying, but we just can't find it. It's going to be too difficult to get the talent. And I really challenge organizations to say, show me the labor market analysis that you have done. What specific talent do you need that is not available in the country or even in neighboring countries?
yeah,
And nobody has done that analysis really on a serious level. It's a feelings-based,
yeah,
kind of exercise. And very often it also goes back to what you're looking for is somebody highly skilled, but what you're paying is an entry-level job. So those skills do exist in the local labor market, but they're not going to do the job for $200 or $300 a month. That's very clear.
yeah,
And when you change it around, the same job, when you bring in somebody from outside, all of a sudden the salary, the benefits, everything goes up. So if you offered the same to somebody from within the country, you'd find, a lot of people willing to give back to their own countries and to their communities. But it's got to be a fair exchange.
Yeah, yeah. And I've heard people saying, that if you pay high salaries, for example, in a country like Kenya, let's talk about Kenya, that's where you're based, that somehow that skews the job market or something like that. What do you think about that?
First of all, INGOs in many cases have already distorted labor markets. In many countries, INGOs are the highest paying employers that exist. So, people joining the INGO sector are not necessarily doing that because of this huge passion or altruistic motives, because it's a good job, which is fine, because at the end of the day, you are interested in service delivery, and you can do that very well, even if your motivation is not, supporting, it's not altruistic. But the second point about saying, well, it's going to, really change the local labor markets, a private sector never really worries about that. Private sector says, look, I want this job done, and I want to pay higher than everybody else so I can get the best to do this job for me. So the argument doesn't actually make a lot of sense. And, what do you want? You want to get the services, the highest degree of services to those in need. And that costs what it costs. So you can't say, well, if I pay $1,000 more, now I'm, creating some issues, particularly, like I said, because the issues are already there. Yeah. The cost of renting business premises or even accommodation in those green zones where INGOs and embassies are, already makes it prohibitive for anybody, who's not in that circle to rent a business premises there. So it's already happened. That bubble has already been created. So you can't be saying, I'm not going to pay higher salaries because I'm fearing the impact I have on the local labor market.
No, what you're really saying is I don't want to pay higher salaries to people from that country because I want to keep paying them to myself.
Precisely. Yeah. Precisely. Yes.
Yeah. And I think about, in many countries, including the UK, right, the differentiation between low salaries and high salaries is so huge. Anyway, it's a global problem that we have of like inequity in how people are paid for what they do, So it's kind of, you can't get away from that as an INGO just by saying, we don't want to distort something that's so distorted already. Yeah.
And you already see it, if you look at most pay scales, the lowest earning individual, which is normally a driver, a cleaning lady, or a security guard, and then mid-level up to high-level management, you find huge inequities. You actually have poverty created within an organization because those two profiles will not be shopping in the same supermarket. They will not be able to afford a meal in the same restaurant or, live in the same area. So you already have huge discrepancies, and you're creating kind of a poverty trap within your organization, which, let's say in a European context, as much as there's also discrepancies, but you will not usually find that the lowest paying staff cannot go to the same supermarket as the CEO. They can both afford to go to, Sainsbury's to get a bottle of water, whereas in many, sub-Saharan African countries, that is not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about what the lowest salary is equivalent to. You won't find generally, apart from maybe like cleaning staff, and you quite often find that in organizations where the cleaning staff are hired in and actually they're really bad, really on really low pay or something. But generally you won't find like lower level staff being paid so little that they can't afford the basic things they need for their family. You just find that people that are paid higher are able to save more and all that kind of thing. But you're right, like in many countries where INGOs are working, they're paying like drivers and admin staff too little to really live. And that, I think, should be tackled before we start complaining about, whether we're doing something to the market in more general terms, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about all these issues, if you were to wave a Faye's magic wand.
Oh dear.
maybe what are a few of the things that you would like do tomorrow or change now in organizations, or maybe it's what are a few things you'd really invite organizations to tackle, most urgently? And maybe you said some of them already, but it's nice to end with kind of a bit of a, Faye's magic wand.
If I had a magic wand and tomorrow we could change many of the things, one of the first things I would have is INGOs operating more like social enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
So really switch up entirely this, operating environment and aid dependencies, and just getting more private sector ethos into the way that programs are delivered and managed. And that already, I believe, would make quite a huge influence, because, like many people say, it's business will end poverty, not aid. Aid has been around for a long time. It's had its place. It's done some good things. But when you see real transformation in communities, that's because of economic empowerment, because people have access to jobs or to, business opportunities that allow them to build themselves up, put their kids through school, healthcare, employ others. That's where the future lies. So that would be my main wand number one. Wand number two, if I could wave it again, is, like I mentioned in the beginning, is get more diversity at executive level into those organizations. I would like to see, not just at board level, but I would like to see more CEOs even coming from, the countries which these INGOs are serving, and other senior managers, so that we can really start addressing the issues from an informed perspective. And not just from a kind of outside observer, living in the country, but living in a very protected, environment, and always having that kind of fallback plan of, at least I can get on the plane and get out of here if I really need to.
Right.
And lastly is the issue of care, which you had mentioned as well before. It's overhaul your systems, invest in healthcare, psychosocial care, emergency care for your staff who are the ground workers, who are from that country, who will remain after, you have pulled out, and all of the other staff who are not from the country have been flown out. They really need the support.
Yeah.
So those are the three things.
The three phase message. I agree with all of those.
Yeah.
I agree with all of those things, I think, and I think it's so true, and what we've been reflecting on, that really a kind of localization agenda is about really shifting how we think about our work. It's not just like a kind of thing that you can do on the side. And it comes back to me to really thinking about, well, what is our kind of right role in a system? And maybe it is just to assist money to flow, or in some way, or to enable people to solve problems that emerge in their communities in a different way. But I think some of the problems that we've talked about emerge from us kind of feeling like our role is like something much more almost significant than it needs to be, right? That like we've got the solution, like you said. So
yeah, and the role is not to be the savior, the knight in shining armor coming in, and lots of issues. I always say, where you stand on a particular issue depends on where you sit. How you feel about an issue if you're working in the Netherlands or in Sweden is very different on how you feel about the same issue if you are, in South Sudan and Eritrea. And if you're trying to fix a problem for Eritrea, the solution needs to come from Eritrea. It cannot come, from somewhere else. Support and ideas and brainstorming can come from there. Of course, let's consult widely, but ultimately, the responsibility, the accountability needs to sit within that community, because otherwise it's like we see so often, aid projects start, and once the agency pulls out, it just collapses, because communities never really felt it was their project. It was something done to them, not done with them.
Yeah. That's a brilliant way to end. Thank you so much, Faye, for talking with me today, and I've really enjoyed it, and I hope people will listen to some of what you had to say.
Thank you very much as well for inviting me once again and for listening to my radical views.
They're absolutely welcome here.
Great. Listen, have a lovely day, and I look forward, to listening to all of the other speakers as well during the conference.
Yeah, thanks, Faye. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to me, Marianne Clements, in conversation with Faye Ekong, and this is Healing Solidarity, Embodying Change, the second conference about reimagining international development. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. If you'd like to spend a little bit more time with the ideas and suggestions we discussed in this talk or any of the others in this conference, don't forget you can make a contribution to support the production of the conference and get access to recordings and resources to help you go deeper with these themes and ideas. Just click the link below this video to find out more.